Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining for another GLO seminar. I'm really pleased to introduce today's speaker, John Denew, and I am especially thankful to John for agreeing to present because it's midnight where John is at, and so usually this is pub time rather than presentation time. But yeah, no, that's thanks so much for doing that. John is just to say that not only a brilliant economist, but he's a whiz kid when it comes to panel whiz. So if you have any panel data, if you want, and speaking of kids, John is going to tell us all about kids' aspirations and dreams today. So just before John starts the talk, usual stuff, the seminar is being recorded and it will be available tomorrow or Monday at the latest on our GLO website. And please click mute if you haven't done it yet. And as usual, ask the questions, put them in the chat, or if there is some clarification question, go ahead and please unmute yourself and you can interrupt. I assume, John, that's okay if there is a clarification question to do it.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, great. Over to you, John.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. Thanks very much for having me, Matt Lube and Klaus, and for organizing all this. And yeah, so I'm really excited about getting some feedback on this. This is the first presented this paper, and it's really sort of the culmination of about a year's work working together with two co-authors, Sonia and Clement, who are both at the Center for Health Economics at Monash University here in Melbourne in Australia. And the project is actually funded by the Australian Research Council. And so it's the kind of the first big project coming out of that funding. So the project is Dreaming Big, Higher Occupational Aspirations from Persistent and Advantaged Kids. And what I'll be talking about is kids' aspirations, the types of desired jobs that kids want to have, and looking at some of the determinants of that. So let's get started. So to give us a little bit of kickstart into this, obviously occupational choice is going to be super important, and it's going to affect pretty much everything that we do later on in life. It's going to affect income. It's going to affect not just in the near future, lifetime earnings, health, all kinds of family outcomes, assortative mating, all kinds of things. So occupational choice is going to be important. And there's also a fair amount of literature which shows some stickiness in terms of intergenerational mobility in occupational choice, and also in human capital. So butchers and bakers have kids that become butchers and bakers, let's just say. And some well-known sort of usual suspects in this area, Miles Korak or Phil Oreopoulos, would have a lot to say about that. So there is a sort of a stickiness quite often. It shows up internationally. It's certainly an issue to be reckoned with. So what we're looking at are basically trying to understand some mechanisms which would be useful for targeting, which might help to improve this situation of occupational choice. Maybe there's some things that we can do to help support some movement in occupational choice. And what we'll be doing is we'll be focusing on non-cognitive skills as the main mechanism to be influencing occupational choice. So it's clear that non-cognitive skills are going to play a role in terms of wage returns, but we'll also see that it plays a role in the selection of of the jobs themselves, this occupational sorting. And if we know that, then of course what we can do is we can target that for policy responses. So the contribution of this paper is really sort of focusing on non-cognitive skills in occupational sorting. And in the data that we have, we'll look at job aspirations of adolescents who are 14 to 15 years old. And we'll be trying to find an SES gradient, a socioeconomic status gradient in job aspirations already at this age of 14 and 15. Well, we'll certainly find one. And we'll look to see how non-cognitive skills can be sort of a mechanism or a pathway for this gradient.
This paper is actually incredibly relevant for me.
Yeah,
it's actually incredibly relevant.
Yeah, so the main findings that we get from the project is that really advantaged kids, and this is what we measure by SES, by socioeconomic status, advantaged kids really have sort of a twofold benefit. And in the first dimension, really what it is that we're looking at is these high SES kids sort themselves into desires for these high job persistence or jobs with high persistence requirements. So they sort themselves into jobs that have certain characteristics, and these characteristics, which we'll see, are those jobs that have as their characteristics persistence as one of the character traits that you need to have this type of job. And that really kind of explains the sort of the SES socioeconomic status gradient in wages. But not only that, is high SES kids are able to develop persistence before they get to the job market faster. So in two senses, they're sorting themselves into sort of getting these types of jobs, and they're also actually acquiring the traits of persistence to be able to get those jobs. So it's a very interesting picture. So if you're not one of these high SES kids, then unfortunately you're getting sort of a double disadvantage. The low SES kids are not targeting these high persistence type jobs. They're not able to acquire in that same sense the persistence that's required for these jobs. And so given that we know that, of course, then there's a sort of a policy window that's perhaps available to us to make sort of targeted interventions to try to address some of these differences or disparities. So there's quite a lot of literature that ties into to what we're doing here. There's a lot of papers here on adult non-cognitive skills, personality traits. And these are going to play a role for a whole vector of important outcomes: education, labor, just a ton of things. And one of the things that got us looking at this was Heckman's 2006 paper, where we're looking at non-cognitive skills alongside of cognitive skills. And we see that non-cognitive skills really are important for a whole bunch of later life outcomes: wages, employment, maybe less riskier behaviors, occupational choice. And the key thing here is that Heckman states that really non-cognitive ability is as important, if not more important, than cognitive ability for these types of outcomes. So we know also for adults, big 5 personality traits, conscientiousness is associated with higher earnings, and we'll see how this plays an important role in a moment. Almlund looks at personality and conscientiousness, and that's predictive again of important outcomes, wages, job performance, good health outcomes, etc. Very correlated with persistence is a concept of grit, which is persistence and, say, passion for long-term goals. That's also associated with better outcomes, for instance, in grade point averages, sort of more consistency in one's career, and high stress competitions like spelling bees. So you can see how these non-cognitive skills, conscientiousness, or persistence are being rewarded in the market in various types of ways. We also can see very clearly there's an intergenerational transmission of human capital. And so, like I mentioned briefly at the beginning, guys like Miles Korak and Phil Oriopoulos, they're showing very clear intergenerational transmission of economic status as picking up in income, educational attainment. In the German framework, Silke Anger and Guido Heineck are clearly making a relationship between cognitive skills and parents' abilities and parental investments in child cognitive outcomes. And so you can see this sort of intergenerational connection. So it's important, and also some of these big five traits play a role. That's going to be important in a moment. We'll see. So so it's not only in terms of measuring human capital in adulthood. It's also important to be measuring human capital in childhood. And we can see also that children's skills are also, systematically differing by family background. So it's playing a role here. Also, Silke Anger has another paper that's looking more at non-cognitive skills as opposed to cognitive skills, and there's also some sort of parent-child transmission going on there as well. So one thing that's starting to get a little bit closer to what we want to do here is looking at children's occupational aspirations. In other words, what kinds of jobs do children want to get when they sort of grow up? And here SES is also playing a role. And you can see that there's also papers that are looking at this. And so that's actually kind of one of the kickstarts to why it is what we're looking at this particular research questions. So we know from the Heckman papers that non-cognitive skills are going to be really important in terms of job sorting. And so let's take this a little bit further on and see if we can identify something in the Australian context. And so, surprise, surprise, I'm not going to be talking about the Hilda today. I'll be using another panel data set, but it's an Australian panel data set, the longitudinal study of Australian children, the LSAC. And it's a very detailed study that looks at two cohorts of children or even babies in Australia and follows them up over time. And so we'll be looking at the K cohort, which is the kindergarten cohort. And they call it that because it was started when the children were 4 and 5. And so we'll follow them up through the ages every 2 years. And at some point, we'll be asking these kids what kinds of jobs do they want to have when they grow up. So the occupational choice key variable is going to be asked of 14 and 15-year-olds in the 6th wave, what is your desired occupation? And what it is that they collect a free text answer. and we have to code it up. And so what we do is we use a standard coding algorithm, an SOC coding algorithm, standard occupational coding. And that's basically the starting point. And what we do is for each one of these responses, we go through and we check the original text, we check what's been suggested as possible occupations, and then we do an eyeball for each one of these near 2,000 codes. So we check everything by hand, and then we map it to an occupational code that would be standard for Australia. Now, what's kind of cool is that although we don't have something like this in Australia, for the United States, there's something called the ONET, and the ONET is actually a really, really rich data set. It's basically a description of every possible occupation known to man, and describing these occupations in various dimensions. And what we'll be looking at is the work styles dimension, and it'll be for every single occupation. There's a mapping of the work styles that are associated with this particular job. And so the work styles will be the personal characteristics that affect how well someone will perform a particular job. So if you said, yeah, I'm going to be an economist, well, you need to have some math skills, et cetera. You need to have various types of work styles, et cetera. And the focus that we'll have is on the types of personality traits that we can describe for each one of these occupations. So,
hi John, sorry, may I ask a question regarding how they
sure.
elicit the prospect occupation? Do they make a distinction between what they want to do and what they think they will do? Or to put it differently, how many people say they want to be a football player?
Right. So my generation, it would have been a hockey player or an astronaut or something like that. So we'll get exactly to that question in a moment. That's an excellent question. And
no
so for this, it's not what they think they will be; it's what they want to be, and that's a really important distinction. We'll see in a jiffy. We'll see kind of the discrepancies there. But what I wanted to say is that we're still using Australian data, but what we're asserting is that Australia, the Australian labor market is similar enough to that of the United States to be able to use this mapping, even though it's an American mapping of all the characteristics and traits that are required or are typically associated with particular occupations. We still say that this is going to be appropriate for Australia, and there's a number of papers that look at this type of data set in that context, in this international context. So the types of characteristics that we'll be looking at, these will be the required non-cognitive skills that would be associated with this type of job. And so, some sort of effort or persistence or initiative, leadership, this whole vector of characteristics that would be associated or required for this type of job, these 14 and 15-year-olds nominate as the job that they want to be when they grow up. Now, so Matt Lube, you asked exactly the right kind of question. We're looking to see, for instance, in this entire vector of characteristics, we're looking to see what types of characteristics maybe that we can sort of group together and combine together to try to sort of reduce some of the dimensionality of this. So we group some of these characteristics using principal component analysis, and you can see that these bold characteristics are the ones that are significant, that are loading on. So these characteristics, these non-cognitive skills, are loading on these four factors, these four main factors. And we give labels to these factors. One the first column we'll call teamwork, persistence and ambition, independence and consistency, and cautiousness. But the thing to realize here is that basically the first two factors cover about 70% of the variation in these characteristics. All right, so these first two factors are going to be the main factors that we'll be looking at. So we're looking to see the extent to which these non-cognitive skills in the longitudinal survey of Australian children are matching up to the job requirements for particular jobs. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to measure persistence in an age-appropriate manner. And it kind of matters because what's persistence at the age of 4 or 5 is going to be different from the age of 14, 15. So it's going to be measured by the parents, usually the mother's responses about how the mother believes the child to be persistent, for instance. So, and it's basically, the child likes to complete one task or activity before going on to the next. When a toy or game is difficult, this child quickly turns to another activity, sort of drops it. Or a little bit later, the child does not complete homework unless reminders are given, those kinds of things. So the idea being is that we can get an age-appropriate measure of persistence for all the children over their entire period that we're observing them. We're also getting indicators for pro-sociality, and in the same kind of way, and we're going to match also these things to the job requirements. So you can imagine things like plays alone or connects with other people, generally is liked by other children, sort of these interconnectivity types of characteristics. So in a similar kind of way as this persistence is higher scores are more of that. Okay. Some of the control variables, those are the kind of the target variables, and we've got obviously a whole bunch of control variables. We're looking at education, other types of cognitive skills, sociodemographic indicators, school, region, et cetera. So we're picking up quite a lot in terms of cognitive skills and looking at some of these test scores. We're picking up other non-cognitive skills and also these targeted non-cognitive skills like persistence. So let's have a look at some of the descriptors. Now, this is where Matlub's question comes in. Is, for instance, these are the desired jobs that these kids age 14 and 15 want to have. And we've got them, grouped in these broad categories. Some people want to be managers, professionals of various types, technicians, clerks, or salespeople, laborers, etc. And the thing is that we can look at what they say that they want to be, and this would be the sort of the percentage breakdown. 67% say they want to be a professional of some kind. But when you look at sort of who are the actual professionals at the ages of 15 to 24, well, only about 9% adolescents or young adults 15 to 24 are actually professionals. So 67% want to be, but only 9 are actually. And then if you looked at the overall distribution, with older people, it's only about 22%. So a lot of people want to become professionals, but far fewer end up becoming professionals. And you can see also here, 2% want to become laborers, but actually quite a large share actually becomes a laborer, as in also for sales. 1% want to become sales, but then 25% actually become sales workers in that 15 to 24 range, and then a very large 9% later on. So you can see there, just because you want to become something doesn't mean that you actually become that particular occupation. So what we can do is we can look at the socioeconomic status on a continuum and break it up into quintiles. And we can look at the top 10 desired jobs by the lowest quintile and the top 10 desired jobs by the highest quintile. And you can see systematically that children in the low SES quintile are wanting to become occupations that look very different from those of the high socioeconomic status kids. You can just see, these would be the top 10 for low SES kids. Motor mechanics, like car mechanics, or working in the army or working in the police. Whereas high SES kids, they want to become GPs, they want to become lawyers, they want to become scientists. And so you can see, engineers, you can see there are some very clear differences going on here. So you can look at these responses and look at these four main latent variables that we've calculated, looking at the SES gradient in occupational choice. So what I mean by the SES gradient is, in each one of these quadrants, I'm looking at the thick line is the high SES kids, and the thin line is the low SES kids. And we're talking about the top quintile and the bottom quintile. And so the kinds of jobs that these kids want to become, you can see, for instance, this vector here in teamwork. You can see the high and low SES kids are pretty much on top of each other. There's a slight difference there for the high SES kids in the persistence. Also in the lower left quadrant, in the independence and consistency, and cautiousness is pretty much one on top of the other. Now, the thing is that these top two quadrants, the teamwork and the persistent ambition, they explain about 70% of the variation in job requirements that I mentioned earlier. And what we're going to do is we're going to match these types of characteristics to LSAC non-cognitive skills. And so we'll look at sort of what the jobs are that these kids want to become. We'll get a mapping of the types of skills that are required for that, and then try to map back some of the, we'll map that back to the actual non-cognitive skills that these kids have. So let's have a look at a description of the social skills. And this is this sort of getting at this sort of connectedness type dimension. So what we can look at is, here, if I go back to here, this would be teamwork. That would be the sort of the connectedness type dimension. What we can do is we can look at the skills that the kids are shown to have, their own skills, non-cognitive skills. And again, we've got the thick line is the high SES kids, the thin line is the low SES kids. And pretty much you can see over time, as these kids get older, it's pretty much a similar kind of a development for high SES kids compared to low SES kids as they get over. So we don't really see too much of a difference over their age profiles. Now this changes quite a bit, actually, we can see more of a similar pattern in kids age 4 to 5 in terms of persistence. High SES kids have maybe in some areas slightly more. We can see a very similar pattern here at age 6 and 7. And then as kids get older, age 8 and 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, what we see is sort of like a slow change, a slow movement away for these high SES kids to having much higher SES gradient. So you can see these high SES kids are having more and more of these non-cognitive skills of persistence in the types of jobs, or in their own characteristics over time. So they're gaining in persistence, these high SES kids, and the low SES kids are lagging behind. And you can see it's a very slow movement, but it's a very clear movement. Okay. So let's talk about that was the background. Let's talk about the empirical strategy. And what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at OLS models where we'll be looking at the outcome variables as being the desired job characteristics. So this would be the characteristics of the desired job. And also the a mapping of this desired job into the average log earnings that are associated with that desired job. And these are the outcomes, and we'll be looking at the role on the right-hand side, the role of socioeconomic status, effectively identifying the SES gradient. And we'll also be looking at the role of persistence in this non-cognitive skill in determining these desired job characteristics and also average log earnings. So it's these two main factors that we'll be looking at. Obviously, we'll have a whole bunch of control variables, and there'll be like cognitive skills and sociodemographic indicators, et cetera. We'll also be looking at the persistence trait. And so seeing how this persistence trait will be changing over time. Okay, so let's get into it. So let's have a look at the SES gradient in determining the non-cognitive skill requirements for the desired job, right? So kids say that they want to have a particular desired job. We map then those characteristics that are associated with those jobs, and we then do this principal component analysis, and we've got these 4 broad categories. Then what we do is we run these, we run an OLS regression on each one of these sort of clusters of non-cognitive skill requirements that are associated with that job. And we're looking to see what the role is of SES. And we'll operationalize SES by parents' education. And that'll be a standardized variable with respect to education. And what we can see is that here with respect to persistence, we see that parents' education plays a very clear role, and it plays the most dominant role amongst all these 4 categories or clusters of non-cognitive skills. But we also know, for instance, that these first 2 clusters of non-cognitive skills explain 70% of the variation. So these are the 2 main areas, and we can see this is actually a really important finding here about the role of SES gradient with respect to persistence. So let's have a look, for instance, at the various items that are in this cluster that are associated here with persistence. All right, so achievement effort, persistence itself, initiative, and also innovation. Okay, so you can see that these are the main these are the significant items that play a role in that particular principal component's latent variable, which we'll call persistence ambition. And we'll focus then, of course, on this particular item, persistence, instead of the overall concept. So we'll get actually straight to the this particular item of persistence itself. So now what we're doing is we're regressing on the left-hand side. The outcome variable is persistence in the strict sense. And then what we're doing is we're using the same right-hand side variables that we had in the previous regression. So we're looking at the role of SES, the SES gradient, and that's basically column 1. So we see very clearly, very similar to what we saw with this latent construct for persistence. In the narrowest sense, we have just the persistence item, and we see it's a positive, strongly significant SES gradient. What we can also do is then augment this regression with the child's own persistence as given by the parent. And what we can see here is that both play a role. So the socioeconomic status gradient is clearly still playing a role, but the child's own persistence is playing a role in determining the job choice and the extent to which persistence is one of the required characteristics of the jobs that this child is choosing. Bit hard to say, but you can see that that these coefficients are quite strong, and that's despite, of course, a whole bunch of control variables. We can augment this even further and look at, for instance, the role of the parents' mapped persistence characteristics. So what we do is we look to see what types of jobs that the parents are actually carrying out, and then we map the same persistence score to those jobs, and that we see, for instance, that really does not play a role. So we can see that remains insignificant, and yet what we can see is that, you know, through the various controls, is that both the parent's education and the child's own persistence are the ones that come through almost unchanged as we control successively for sociodemographic indicators, but also with a whole bunch of cognitive skills. All right, so that's a very strong and stable result. So what we can also look at is how this SES gradient is impacting on, or is associated with, the log earnings of the jobs that the children say that they want to be when they grow up. So it's not that the jobs that they actually have, we're not that quite far in this child-related panel. It's just the jobs, you know, I want to be an astronaut, and then there's a certain amount of earnings that are associated with that particular job. And what we're using for these earnings information is what we're looking at is the average weekly earnings, and we log that, and that's from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and it's going by the standard Australian New Zealand standard classification of occupations. And so what we're doing is we're connecting this parent's socioeconomic status gradient to these desired job log earnings. And you can see at the beginning, we see that's a very clean result. We augment that in the same way that we did before with the child's own persistence. You can see that's still a clean result. We looked at the extent to which the parent's job persistence is mapped back. We see that really doesn't play a role. But what we can also do is map in the persistence characteristic, which was associated with the job. So on the left-hand side, we've got the earnings that are associated with the job that the child wants to carry out. On the right-hand side, we've got the persistence and ambition vector, that cluster from the principal component analysis. We add that in, and what we can see is that greatly diminishes the parent's socioeconomic status gradient. And if we add them all in, you can see that this coefficient basically gets clobbered down to 0, highly insignificant. And really that sort of socioeconomic status gradient is explained away by basically by selection of low SES kids into jobs that are associated with low persistence characteristics requirements. So how does this persistence trait, which seems to be very important here, how does this develop over time? Let's have a look. Well, what we can see here is on the left-hand side, what we've got is the persistence trait of the child. And on the right-hand side, what we've got is the socioeconomic gradient. And what we can see, for instance, in the first specification is that, yeah, quite clearly that, you know, parents' socioeconomic status plays a role, you know, the background of the kid. But you can see that the child's persistence trait is growing over time, something that you would expect to see. Now, to what extent do parenting styles play a role in this? Well, let's add this in. We'll look at the two main parenting styles: warmth, parenting warmth, and consistency. In other words, warmth, you know, not being too aggressive with children, giving them space to make mistakes without giving them lots of stress, but also consistency in following up with what you claimed you were going to do. If you don't clean your room, then you won't be able to go out and play, those kinds of things. So the thing is that we control then for these parenting styles, including warmth and consistency. And what you can see is that they certainly play a role, but they all play a role together. So the socioeconomic status gradient plays a role, but also these parenting styles. The parenting styles do not explain away the socioeconomic status gradient. Still important, consistently across the board, pretty much. If we were to interact the socioeconomic status with waves, what we can look to see is how is this socioeconomic status developing over time. And what we can see is that by wave 4 or wave 5, so wave 4 would be the kids starting at the age of 10 and 11, it then starts to really kick in, so that the socioeconomic status really kicks in terms of developing the persistence trait starting at the age of 10 and 11. So this is something that these high SES kids are going to be able to take advantage of, because that's developing their own persistence traits. So persistence is going to pay off in the labor market at some point, but it's actually going to pay off a lot sooner. And we're going to see it paying off here, for instance, in the school system itself. So Australia has standardized tests that are run in grades 3, 5, 7, and 9. And each one of these standardized tests has 5 different components in this so-called NAPLAN test, this National Assessment program, looking at literacy and numeracy. Actually, it's a little bit more than that. It's actually reading, writing, spelling, grammar, and numeracy. And so the thing is that we've got standardized test scores that are the same across the entire country for Australia. And we've got them in years 3, 5, 7, and 9. And what we can see is that, sure, socioeconomic status plays a role in reading scores on these standardized tests, writing, spelling, grammar, and numeracy. But also what we can see is that the student's own persistence is playing already a positive role. So you can see that high SES kids are going to be doing better. And kids that have higher levels of their own persistence trait are going to be doing better. That's kind of an important result. One thing that I was very happy to see is that if you look at the role for private school, is that private school doesn't play a role in terms of increasing your standardized test scores, which I thought was kind of a nice outcome there. So the standard, the socioeconomic status variable is nice and significant and quite strong with respect to being associated with these standardized test scores, but also have a look at persistence, which is pretty much across the board dominating in terms of magnitude compared to the parents' SES. Now, as children, as adolescents sort of morph into adults, we start talking about no longer persistence, but actually conscientiousness. And conscientiousness is one of the components in the big 5 personality traits. And so what we can see is actually, if we look at how persistence maps into adult conscientiousness, what you can see, it's basically persistence mapping into conscientiousness and really not in any of the other big 5 personality traits. So persistence at some point as an adolescent will morph into the conscientiousness in this big 5 personality trait. And we know that conscientiousness is highly associated with a lot of very positive outcomes in the labor market and in health and all kinds of things. So you can see that there's a progression here from this adolescent persistence into adult conscientiousness, and that having being associated with a lot of positive outcomes. So I'm wrapping up now. I guess the conclusions that I have are that that socioeconomic status and persistence really shape the types of jobs that that children or adolescents want to have when they grow up. We show a very, very clear socioeconomic gradient, this SES effect coming through quite clearly. We see, for instance, that advantaged kids with a high SES, have really a twofold benefit. They're wanting to have jobs that require persistence to be able to carry out these jobs. And not only that, are they gunning for those types of jobs, but they're actually accumulating the types of personality traits, non-cognitive skills, that are going to be required to be able to carry out those jobs. And the flip side of that is, of course, that low SES kids are not gunning for those types of jobs. They're not targeting those types of jobs, and they're not acquiring to the same extent the levels of these non-cognitive skills that will be required to carry out those jobs. So you can see it's a bit of a double whammy. The thing is that these types of differences start to show at the age of 10 and 11. And that's when this socioeconomic status gradient starts to kick in and we start to see a divergence. So obviously that means that's an area where we'd be looking to make some policy differences. The role of parents' own jobs and their parenting styles, we really see no evidence for the intergenerational transmission of the parents' jobs characteristics to be influencing the types of jobs that their children want and those characteristics that are associated with them. What we do see is that it's basically the parent's education that seems to be the transmission mechanism. It's not the jobs per se that these parents get and the characteristics that are associated with those jobs. It's the parent's education. So we see that parenting styles are important. We saw they were nice and big and positive and significant, but they cannot explain away the SES gradient. That SES gradient is there. Better off kids are just doing better across the board, and unfortunately, these parenting styles can't sort of dissipate that SES effect. So coming up to some pretty much the end of my talk, there's obviously some policy implications here. We see really that there's at the latest by the age of 14, 15, kids are thinking in terms of different jobs if they're in high SES type backgrounds as compared to low SES kids, very different types of jobs. And the thing is we also, we identify persistence as really the main job requirement that's going to be associated with good jobs and high SES type scenarios, and obviously that's going to be correlated with good outcomes like higher wages, etc. So obviously, if we're economists, we want to be making recommendations to policymakers. Persistence is going to be a really important trait that we'd want to be focusing on in childhood, because we probably have a chance of being able to affect it in childhood before a lot of these decisions are made at the age of 14 and 15, and maybe even too late at that point. There's going to be long-term positive payoffs that are associated with this persistence. So probably earlier on in childhood is the time that we'd really want to be focusing on that. And there's some evidence for that. There's these papers by Cunha and Heckman, for instance, are looking at these sort of differences relating to persistence already at the age of 9 and 10. So let's have a think about what we can do to impact on these important characteristics of persistence at a time in which it could actually make a difference. So and we can see that even already at the age of 8 and 9 through these standardized NAPLAN tests, we can see that it's even having a difference in these school outcomes, which of course are going to affect the types of jobs that people will be able to get later on. So that's all I have to say for today, and I probably shouldn't have talked so long, but there's still hopefully time for some questions, and really looking forward to the feedback that you have. This is the first time we've been able to present this paper. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John. Really, really interesting stuff here. Just to clarify, I didn't ask the question. It was Pietro who asked you the question. So
okay.
Just a disclaimer.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. So anybody has any questions for John? I have a couple, but I'll wait until the people. Yeah, Ira?
Yeah, okay. So, John, I should have expected it of you forcing me to think at this hour of the morning. So, or night, I guess.
Yeah,
so,
at night, yeah.
Yeah. So, there are so many different aspects of this that are both fascinating and I wonder about questionable, but let me start with a simple example, I think. I think there's an awful lot of heterogeneity that somehow gets washed away, maybe moving from the basic question to the aggregation through the principal component analysis and further, and it's opposing this structure, which I fear might be determining your results in the end. Okay, or have a big impact. But let me give you one thought. So right at the beginning in the jobs that low SES students, people they want to be registered nurses.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I don't know. It seems to me there's an awful lot of what I would call persistence in getting your RN degree. It's a difficult degree to get. It requires a lot of different tests and certifications and licensing.
Yep.
Much more than, I don't know, academics. Okay. So as that one example, why would that,
Well, yeah. So I mean, so the thing is, what we're doing is we're using the ONET, right? So we've got a standardized scale. We're not giving any persistence values ourselves. We're using a standardized scale used, effectively by the U.S. government. This is a massively validated in all of their dimensions, validated measure of all of these characteristics that are associated with particular jobs. So I don't think there's errors and variables in terms of what you're saying. Now, one of the comments that you had was about the about the grouping. The grouping is the principal component analysis. That just basically gives us the idea as to what should we be looking at. And so we use the principal component analysis actually to cut to the chase. And the cutting to the chase is really identifying the main characteristic of persistence. And what we saw, for instance, in the development really was something that was pretty stark. I mean, these are just basically descriptive statistics, and you can see this sort of the slow movement over time in persistence, and really in nothing else. And so that persistence is coming up very cleanly.
I guess I'd like to see some robustness tests.
Yeah, so actually you're seeing the short version of the paper. We were also concerned about robustness, and that's kind of really what in the regressions, for instance, is I can show you is these types of additional controls. For instance, controls for cognitive skills, and it's basically the non-cognitive skills playing a role over and above the very hard measures of cognitive skills.
Okay, any other questions?
I just have a very quick question because I have to go teach again. When I look at your presentation, where does the affirmative action fit in for children? Because I know when it comes to affirmative action in Australia, I think there's one legislation in 1986 where they try to promote like women should be paid equal pay, so forth and so on. But do they have a program or so to help out? Even though you're looking at the advantages of kids, on the flip side, what other programs do they have to so if so, where does that fit into your story?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that there's any affirmative action with respect to gender. What I think what is possible is because we know, for instance, that at age 8 and 9, that these first differences are starting to show up. Let me just pop this up. Right here. So for instance, at 8 and 9, the first differences are starting to show, and we can see that they're moving apart. These high SES and low SES, so that the well-off kids are just doing better. And so one possibility is, of course, making interventions at the age of 8 and 9 or 10 and 11 to be able to support kids in the acquiring of these persistent skills, so that they even have a chance by the end of high school to be getting on the right track. The problem is that by the age of 14 and 15, kind of the race is already run. So these kids are thinking about different jobs, systematically different jobs. And so not only are they thinking about different jobs, but they've actually acquired the non-cognitive skills that will allow them to get those good jobs. And so not only they've got this accumulated persistence, and then they go on to different trajectories. So it's going to be pretty hard, I think, after the fact, to try to sort of come up with these affirmative action programs. My suspicion is sort of what Heckman was saying, is at the age of 8 and 9 you can have a big impact, and that will impact all the way through and impact in a whole bunch of very positive outcomes, like educational attainment, income, health, those kinds of things.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. John, there are two, I don't know if you can access chat on your, there are two questions, and I'm going to restrict now just to two questions, the ones in the chat function.
Okay.
If anyone has any other questions, they can email John. I have a couple of questions, but I'll talk to you by email, John. So if you can answer Alfonso's and Madeleine's question.
Yeah, that's right. So so parents were not asked about what they want their kids to be. So it's not like I want my kid to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. It's what the kids themselves said that they wanted to be. Unfortunately, we don't have any sort of the kids or the parents pushing the kids in a particular direction. We do observe their own occupation, but not what they want their kids to be. When I was in college, I did work with one of the people behind these traits. I took many tests. It spitted me out as someone who should go to the military as an officer. Well, I do know you, Maddie. Sorry. This was Ira. Oh, sorry. It's moving. The chat is moving. Ira, you should definitely not have gone into the army. I'm glad you did not do that. That's a very good outcome for you. Look, I think there's Maddie's. Do high SES parents know the right answers to give these questions about child non-cognitive skills, rather than the kids actually having those skills? In other words, you think that the parents are giving the answers that they think the interviewer wants to hear, and high SES people might be able to do that more systematically. I don't know. It could be the case. I guess it's sort of it's a panel, so they see the same people time and time again. I know some of my work with other panels is that the longer you're in the panel, the more honest you are in your responses. It's hard for me to say if they're just sort of giving the interviewer what they think that they want to have. I don't think so. I think there's a lot of tough questions in this data set, and I mean like really tough questions. And so I think that they're getting answers to those very tough questions. And so my suspicion is that this is probably a low intensity ask.
Okay, I think we're going to stop. Thank you so much again, John. Well done, a great presentation, a great topic as well. And now have a double whiskey and go to sleep. I hope you get a good night's sleep. Okay, you can.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and as always, it's a great group to be interacting in, and thanks very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Good night.
Very helpful comments. Thanks very much. Take care.
We might want to,
Bye-bye.